Hello and welcome to today's lesson. We are going to cover topics under the standard 2.2a and b in 6th grade and also topics under the Study Island lesson, multiply and divide fractions and decimals. So today's lesson is going to be exactly on what the title sounds like. We're going to be taking fractions and multiplying and dividing them and looking at the rules for doing that, and we're going to be taking decimals and multiplying and dividing them and looking at the rules for that. So if you're going to want to make sure that you take good notes, especially on those rules, so that you have that to refer back to when you are trying these problems on your own. So if I ever go too fast, just pause the video and take your notes. And then you can even pause the video at the beginning of a question. You try out the division or multiplication and then watch the video to see if you get the right answer or not. And that way you can see where you're getting stuck and where you're doing fabulous. So thank you for joining us today, and let's go ahead and take some notes. So we're first going to look at problems where you are multiplying fractions. So I wanted to review the rules for that first. When you're multiplying fractions, you're going to multiply the numerators, so that's the tops. Then you're going to multiply the denominators, so that's the bottoms, and that's going to give you your answer. However, your answer, which is 6/20 here, might not always be fully reduced. So you're going to learn to reduce that fraction if necessary as your last step. And here, both of these numbers have a 2 in common, so each was divided by 2, the top and the bottom, to get the final answer of 3/10. So in this problem here, I'm going to multiply the numerators, multiply the denominators. So multiplying the tops, 1 times 2 is 2, so I'm going to have a 2 on the top, and then 2 times 3 is 6, so I'm going to have a 6 on the bottom. However, I don't see that answer over there on the side because this hasn't been fully reduced yet. I look, and both of these numbers are even, so I know I can at least divide a 2 out. So I'm going to divide both these numbers by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 1/3, those are both prime numbers. There's nothing in common that I can divide them both by, so my final answer is going to be B, 1/3. Now, when I'm multiplying mixed numbers, I have to make them improper first. So you might want to write that down, that when you're multiplying mixed numbers, you have to make them improper first. So how to make a mixed number improper is I have this little graphic over here on the side, is you're going to make it mad. So that means you're going to multiply the new denominator bottom by the whole number, and then add the numerator for your new numerator, and then you just move over the denominator. So MAD stands for multiply, add, and then you're going to move the denominator. So that's the D is the denominator. So 2 1/3, I'm going to multiply 2 times 3, and then add the 1. So 2 times 3 is 6. Add 1, that's a 7. And then the denominator stays the same. And then I'm going to do the same for 1 2/5. 5 times 1 is 5. Add the 2 is 7. So I have a 7 on the top. And then I rewrite the denominator. It just stays the same. And that's 5. And now I can multiply the tops and the bottoms. So 7 times 7 is 49. And 3 times 5 is 15. And now I think, is there anything there I can reduce? There's nothing that 49 and 15 have in common, so it's going to stay 49/15. However, we don't like to make numbers or leave them improper. We're going to have to put that back into a mixed number. So to do that, I'm going to think about how many times does 15 go into 49? And you can actually work this out in long division if you want to. Well, 15 times 3, if I go over here on this side, is 45. So that means I'm going to have 15 can go into 49 3 times, so it's going to be my big number. And then that only takes up 45, though, out of the 49. So I still have 4 left over, so that's going to be my numerator, and then the denominator stays the same. And so that means my mixed number is going to be 3 4/15. And then I could check that by using the MAD steps to see if this mixed number gets me back to being improper. The next few problems, I'm going to be looking at how to divide fractions. So the steps when you're dividing fractions that we need to remember is that you are going to flip that second fraction and only the second fraction, which they did here. And then it becomes multiplication instead of division. So you flip the second fraction and multiply. So in multiplication is you multiply the tops and you multiply the bottoms, and then you have to simplify the fraction if necessary. So here you would have to divide this by 2 and then convert it to a mixed number. So this first problem, I have 3/5 divided by 4/9. So that 3/5 stays the same, but I flip the second fraction, so 9's now on the top and 4 is now on the bottom. And I'm going to change division to multiply. So now I just multiply the tops and multiply the bottoms. 3 times 9 is 27. 5 times 4 is 20. And now I'm just going to see if I can simplify that at all. Does 27 and 20 have anything in common? They don't. So I'm just going to I'm going to have to convert that into a mixed number. So I'm going to think, first thing I'm going to think about that you might want to write down is I have to think about how many times does the denominator go into the numerator. So how many times does 20 go into 27? It goes in once. So I'm going to write a big 1. The denominator always stays the same. So I've pulled out a whole, this 1, so that means I've pulled out a whole of 20 out of 27, and that leaves me with 7. So 7 is going to be the remainder when I take out that 120, and that's going to be my numerator, and that's going to be my final answer, which is A. Now the same thing applies to dividing fractions. I can't divide them as a mixed number. I have to convert them to be improper also. So I'm going to remember my math steps. I'm going to multiply 2 times 3 and then add the 1. So 2 times 3 is 6 plus 1 is 7. And then the denominator stays the same. And then it's still divide. And then I'm going to have to take 2 times 5 and add the 1. So 2 times 5 is 10 plus the 1 is 11. And that's going to be over 5 again. So now now that they're both improper, not mixed, I can go ahead and do my division steps, which say the first fraction stays the same, but you flip the second fraction and change it to multiplication. So then I multiply the tops. 7 times 5 is 35. 3 times 11 is 33. And I think, is there anything I can simplify 33 and 35 by? No. So then I just have to change that back into mixed. 33 goes into 35 once. And when I pull 33 out of 35, I'm left with 2, which is my numerator. And then the denominator stays the same. That's 33. So that's going to make A my final answer. Now I'm going to look at problems where I am multiplying decimals. So when you're multiplying decimals in the beginning, don't worry about the fact there's decimals. Just treat it like a normal multiplication problem. However, when you get to the end and you have your answer, you're going to need to go back up into the problem and count out how many total number of decimal places, or hops, they call them here. So here I have 3 decimal places in the top and 1 in the bottom. So that means in my answer, I'm going to have 4 numbers in decimal places, or 4 hops. So to multiply this number, I'm going to have to go ahead and rewrite this vertically so that I can work out the multiplication. And so once again, I'm not worrying about the fact that there's decimal places yet. I'm going to worry about that in the beginning. And so I'm going to take 5 times each of these numbers. And when I do that, that's going to be my first line. And then my second line, remember, you either started over 1 or put a 0 here. And then I'm going to multiply 6 by 8, 5, and 1. And when I do that, I get this for my second line. And then I add these up. And I get that as my final answer. But because I had decimals in my problem, I'm going to have to go up here and count how many decimal places do I have. So I have 2 in the first number and 2 in the second number for a total of 4. So that means I'm going to have 4 numbers after the decimal in my answer, and so that's going to make 5.5315 my final answer, which is choice D. Now this problem is going to be similar. I'm going to have to go ahead and write that vertically. And when I write them vertically, I drop the zeros that are before the decimal off just because that's extra numbers to multiply by that I don't need. You can correctly write a decimal with the 0 at the beginning before the decimal or not. We just typically write it so that it draws attention to the fact that there is a decimal. So I'm going to have to go through and multiply all these numbers by 4. And that's my first line. And then I'm going to have to go through and multiply them all by 6. And that's going to be my second line. And then I have to multiply them all by 0, and that's going to be my third line. And I'm going to add them all up. And when I do that, it's going to look like this. So now I'm going to have to go back through my answer, through my problem, and count up how many decimal places I have. So in the first number I have 3, and I also have 3 in the second number. So that means in my answer, I'm going to have a total of 6. But I only have 5 numbers, so that means I'm going to have to add in a 0 to get to the 6. And I add that 0 at the beginning of the number and add the decimal. So that means my final answer is going to be C. Notice C drops that last 0 off because zeros after the decimal point at the end are not necessary. There is assumed. Now we're going to look at dividing by decimals. So when you're dividing by decimals, if that number in front of the dividing symbol, the divisor, is a decimal, you have to make it a whole number. If the decimal is just under this dividing symbol, then you don't have to do anything. So here, to make this a whole number, I have to hop it over once. So that means I have to hop the decimal in underneath the dividing symbol over once also. So then I have a new division problem. And then to get the decimal in the right spot on my answer, I just move the division symbol straight up and then divide like normal. So here, in order to work this problem, I'm going to have to rewrite it in long division format. So that means the second number is always what goes out front. It's my divisor. And then the first number goes underneath the dividing symbol. And so since the divisor, the number out front, does not have a decimal, I don't have to do any extra steps. I'm just going to go ahead and write the decimal in the answer straight above. And I'm going to go ahead and work it as normal long division. 8 goes into 6 0 times, so I'm going to have to look at 69. 8 goes into 69 8 times, so I'm going to write that 8 above the last digit in 69, so above the 9. 8 times 8 is 64, so I'm going to write 64 under here, and then I'm going to subtract, and 69 minus 64 is 5, and then I have this 6 to bring down. And then 8 goes into 56 7 times, because 7 times 8 is 56. And when I subtract those this time, I'm left with 0. And that means I don't have a remainder. I don't have any more numbers to bring down, so I'm done with my long division, which means 87 hundredths, or 0.87, which is choice C, is going to be my final answer. Here's another dividing problem with decimals. So I'm going to have to rewrite that as a long division format. So that means my second number is my divisor, and that's going to go out front. And the first number is going to go underneath the dividing symbol. So this time I do have a decimal as a divisor in front. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is move that decimal to the end. And it only takes one hop to do that. So I'm going to have to do one hop underneath also. So now my new problem is going to be 9 divided by 0.81. So that decimal point is going to move straight up in my answer. And I'm going to look at, okay, well, 9 can't go into 0. It goes in 0 times. And since it's the first 0, I don't have to work it out. But 9 doesn't go into 8 either. But 9 goes into 81 9 times. But you have to be careful here. Because we worked with the 8 first. But because that 8 is after the decimal, I'm going to have to put a filler 0 in. So 9 goes in to 8 0 times. And you can go ahead and work that out. 0 times 9 is 0. And I subtract those and I'm left with 8 and I bring the 1 down. And then like I said, 9 goes into 81 9 times. 9 times 9 is 81. Subtract and you're left with 0. So there's no remainder. And I have no more numbers to bring down. So I'm done. And that's going to make my final answer B. Thank you for joining us today and I hope you learned something new.